your podcast app. You'll see there's a discourse happening. Is this book a masterpiece or problematic? One's a lifelong diehard fan, the other's a first-time reader. Both are really smart and funny and attractive. Sweet feather, sweet feather, talking twins and hierarchy. Sweet feather, sweet feather, relentless focus on their body. Sweet feather, sweet feather, what do they mean by all American? Sweet feather, sweet feather, no sex, just titillation.
So we're here today because you have an additional reading on Nowhere to Run. And I wanted to know, I don't have anything to read. Did you email me? Did you text me an article? What do you mean by an additional reading?
An additional interpretation is what I meant.
That makes more sense.
Now, I just gotta say one thing quick, which is famously in Power Play, I had a follow-up reading, a sort of post-facto reading, as it were, that just blew the socks off of everyone within a 137-mile radius. And since then, I've been hesitant to do any follow-up readings because you seem to be kind of expecting brilliance and having that be the standard. But I just want to say, sometimes a follow-up reading is just a thought I want to put out there, but if I think it's worth sharing, like, we could see if it is or not. So I just hope this is a safe space, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it isn't, but I'm glad that you hope for that.
Do you want to sort of take that one again? What you just said?
I said it isn't a safe space. Do you want me to lie? Oh, no, it's a safe space. No, it's totally fine. I love and accept you no matter what you say. My love isn't conditional. I'm a good parent. Is that what you want?
I don't have histrionic personality disorder.
Like, you're asking me to change. Still, you have not forwarded me any kind of treatment information about my histrionic personality disorder, so I guess we're just going to live through it.
I told you I didn't scroll down that far. Okay. You know, when I was editing Nowhere to Run, I started to think something, just listening to what we were saying, it kind of seemed like an obvious reading to consider. The Karen apology at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like you're not looking at me. What are you're Googling something? What are we doing?
I was thinking about treatment for histrionic personality disorder, but that'll wait. I'm sorry.
You know, this is really close to just kind of going off a cliff. I really, really, really hope for your sake that doesn't happen.
I also
I
hope
really
for
need to see this go off a cliff for your sake and those who love you.
There aren't that many who love me, but I too hope it doesn't go off a cliff.
Sorry, I just need water. One second.
No, sorry. You reprimanded me. She's gone now, listeners. She reprimands me for not being attentive enough. And then she's like, oh no, I've got to get water.
You know what would be actually such a funny bit?
No.
Is if I didn't actually have anything to say. It was just to see how long I could keep you on the phone till you woke up.
Yeah, I mean,
which is something I would do.
It's something you would do in 30 seconds, I think, is kind of the...
No, and now I'm just getting into a little bit of a giggle, but I gotta stop myself.
You got a giggle fit?
No, here's what it is. You know, Nowhere to Run, we talked about basically the whole time this girl, her parents are acting positively cuckoo, okay?
Sure.
Karen, we get multiple, you know, her stepmother, we get multiple documented instances of Karen being terrible to her.
Sure.
And we also see that her father is unwilling to hear the fact that Karen is being terrible to her. You know, the father's saying, like, I don't want to hear this anymore. I won't hear anything bad. Like, things are basically getting worse and worse and worse. And every time we think it's going to turn, it doesn't. And like, every time we think they can't be more monstrous, they get more monstrous. So that's Exhibit A. Exhibit B.
But what was Exhibit A?
Exhibit A is just the context of, we have the history that they are consistently, repeatedly treating her extremely shitty, unwilling to listen, and this is just getting worse and worse and worse.
Okay. So Exhibit A is just the
facts. Robert, is there anything I can say that you're not going to be absolutely ripping me a new rectal hole?
Sometimes people need new assholes. I'm just trying to follow.
Never forget that I listened to a podcast about the evolution of the anus. And I have a lot of interesting facts that might actually help you win Jeopardy one day. You know, it could be a difference. At the final Jeopardy, the question has to do with evolution of the anus. You're gonna wish you would have asked me a follow-up. Why are you distracting me? What I'm trying to say is this. So that was exhibit A, okay? Stop. Exhibit B. Karen at the end has this big turnaround, right?
Mhm.
Where, I think you referenced it in the plot summary as like, oh, she suddenly is like, oh, I've had 5 years of therapy in 5 seconds. And like, suddenly I can recognize I'm psychotic and like, I'm so sorry, and like, whatever. So there's that. Exhibit C. So, to summarize, because you're going to be looking at this eyebrow thing, what are you saying? What's the point? To summarize, Exhibit B was the extreme and inconsistent turn that Karen has at the end with the apology, okay? And the nice happy ending we get. All right, Robert's having a little bit of a fit, a little bit of a histrionic fit over here. Well, God forbid the attention's not on you for 1 second. I gotta keep filling your narcissistic supply. It's just this sort of leaky bucket that never stays filled. Ooh. You okay?
I'm great. Continue, please. We were on exhibit C, if memory serves.
All right. Exhibit C is we have multiple demonstrated instances that Emily practices escaping into imaginary fantasies when her reality is not good. I think the apology and the turnaround at the end is in her head. And we like to have fun, say, imagine this, imagine that. And if I hear some reading that sounds like, oh, this is fun, I'm going to say, show me the evidence, okay? Now, I come to you just with a few examples of what I had in my notes up because I haven't gone through the text and like actually done a full analysis. But let me just tell you what I basically am thinking, okay? First, we have Emily talks about how, as a child, she learned to invent pleasant scenarios to dwell on when she was upset. We know that there's some vaguely alluded to, but never detailed vices or flaws, I think she vaguely refers to, of her mother who left when she was young. We don't know what kind of environment she was in. There may have been addiction, we don't know, but we know she had some tough times. We have the moment of her looking at herself as a child, like she's extremely wounded, extremely traumatized. One of the multiple times that she runs back and forth to the Wakefields, before her dad calls her at the Wakefields, she's having a fantasy. And her fantasy is that Karen's going to apologize and he's going to apologize and they're going to pick her up. And it's like her fantasy is that Karen's going to suddenly basically become a different person. On the phone, his reaction to her in that moment is, and we hate to use this word, but basically gaslights her, right? So this is when she tells him Karen called basically my mother and implied me also being a tramp. And her father basically refused to hear it. And he said, not only are you not going to talk back to her, do not talk about her, which I found really horrifying. So it's him saying like, you can't come to me with anything. But so the sequence of events was she had that fantasy, that phone call happened, which was the reverse of her fantasy. Then the fantasy happened in the end. The fantasy meaning Karen and him came, so she saved the baby. They both basically witnessed her save the baby, still thought the worst of her. Like her dad comes in, assumes she was trying to kill the baby. Karen's flustered, whatever it is. When she goes back to the Wakefields the last time, then they come to her at the Wakefields and do this big performative apology that we did a lot of analysis over, right? And it was like so extreme. And it seems in some sense the kind of wish fulfillment that Emily had. The thing that triggered her right before they went to that conversation was she had looked at the photo, remember, of herself as a baby with her parents and her mom. And then when Karen comes and does her big apology and she goes home with them, and it was like, now everything was great and she had a family again, just like in the pictures, she had a mom and a dad. And we were kind of laughing at it. And I was like, that's a fantasy, I'm scared. And now I'm like, oh, this is literally a fantasy. If we want to give the benefit of the doubt to the writing, right, which would be less likely to do such inconsistent, maybe character thing than what we had seen in the rest of the book. The sad truth that I think you and I were saying, maybe I was saying a little more strongly, was that like this is a very toxic environment, and it's kind of disturbing that like it all gets just sort of tidied up in the end. And it's like, right, it's so much more interesting and in a lot of ways more realistic and more true to what's going on with these actual characters if it doesn't change. It is that bad. And sometimes that's what happens. Because the whole thing is she has nowhere to run, right? Like, it's like this is so bleak that it's too bleak. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the chloroform and the some of Elizabeth's potential, when I made a case for that. It's a little bit of a similar situation. Like, and you talked about that it gets better. Like, well, what do you do if there's no way out? Like, what do you do if, the Wakefields keep sending you back and it just gets worse and worse and worse? Dr. Marks, why are you giving face?
I mean, I'm always giving face. Face card never declines. Oh, sorry. I want to support you and love you in this, and I think it's a very interesting idea.
That's not what your face was saying.
I'm trying to kind of not drive this off a cliff, so to speak.
No, your face was saying you actually liked it.
Well, I liked it at the
I think
very...
you're lying. I think you're lying. I think you like it, and I think you're actually just being...
So
Oh, I
when
don't
you
like it.
first said it, at the very... Had you just said, what if the end reconciliation scene is just in her imagination, it's a fantasy? Jaw dropped, that's very cool. The evidence for me, I'm less convinced.
I've laid out a case, and you're just like, I don't buy it. I'm like, that's nice, but it's more helpful if you can actually address the claims that I've made and address the evidence that I've brought forward.
Happily. So you have painted an accurate and beautiful picture of a young woman in a very dire situation who has retreated into the world of fantasy to cope with the world around her. And yet, for me, I think what makes your reading difficult for me is it is tugging on the very fabric of the text. And if we are to presuppose that this final reconciliation is a fantasy, why couldn't anything else be a fantasy too? You know what I mean? Like, because this happens in front of other people. It's a public thing. You know what I mean? Dr. Pardo?
When you use this very, very rich metaphor of kind of tugging on the fabric of the text, what do you mean by that? Like,
yeah, so I think we talk throughout our reading of the text of how like interesting and subversive it is that it sets us up to expect this one thing, like, oh, Emily is exaggerating how bad her stepmother can't really be that bad, and it turns out she really is that bad. And we get that by virtue of accepting what the text is telling us.
I see what you're saying, except that I feel like the end is what challenges that, because the end is the piece that it's like it tells us that whole story up until, as again, to quote your beautiful, beautiful words, she gets 5 years of therapy in 5 seconds and there's no motivation for it. And you and I both said that's crazy, would never happen. It makes no sense, isn't consistent with her own character that we've seen depicted. In that sense, I feel taking it as literal almost tugs at the fabric of the seams of the text.
I see what you're saying. I think it's bad writing because the book had to end. I don't think it's brilliant writing to talk about the like fantasy world into which Emily retreats.
I don't know. I feel like I brought a bucket of evidence and like I don't really see how you have shown that it's not.
So I want to be really honest with you. I don't see a bucket of evidence.
It's because you weren't listening. You were looking at your hair part. You were looking at your hair part. You were thinking about your hair part like you always are. And you weren't listening to my evidence. And I am happy to repeat it if you want.
Okay. I obviously can't argue with the fact that, yes, I was looking at my hair part. Like, yeah, I was. Sorry that I'm human. I think the evidence that you presented is that Emily often has fantasies that we are told are fantasies, and then we see the reality. And here is, at the end, something that could be a fantasy. Maybe it's a fantasy.
I think you really diminished my case there. I think that's a really myopic and kind of sexist paraphrasing, because it's not just that. No, but I'm actually serious, because it's not just that I was like, oh yeah, sometimes you're making it sound like I said this. Sometimes she kind of fantasizes, and I guess then anything could be fantasy, right, guys? Which isn't what I said. What I said was, not only have we seen demonstrated examples of her having fantasies to deal with her family situations, we saw her like basically repeatedly try to reason with these people. It get worse and worse and worse. her have a fantasy. It said she would imagine the best possible outcome of the most unlikely, best possible thing that could happen. And what happened? She looks at the photo, decides she's gonna have a family. Karen comes over, tells her all the stuff publicly in front of these people, which again, I think from a internal logic perspective, we could work that out. But and then Karen comes and says this like completely uncharacteristic thing, and she's like, great, it's like my mom, I have a mom and dad now. Bye. So it's like, yeah, it could be bad writing, but like I prefer that it's good writing, and I don't think it's a reach, like because I think it actually makes more sense with what we see happening in the paraphrasable content of just the plot of how these parents are behaving, specifically Karen, the evil stepmother. Like she's evil, 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 evil. Suddenly recognizes her ways. I don't know. You said it yourself. Something milk ain't really so clean with that.
I do agree that something in the milk isn't clean. I think we're disagreeing as to what's in the milk. And I would just ask you if this final reconciliation is in Emily's mind, how does her story, like in the world of the book, we don't get any other resolution for her.
So remember when in the first call they had, and she imagines it's going to go great and then it goes really, really bad.
Yes.
And the way that he gets her home is by threatening her that he's going to put the drums outside if she's not home in an hour. So this is how he responds to stuff, right? So in this one, it's like she has a fantasy of them both saying the most perfect, nice things. Then what happens is they come over, say the most perfect, nice things, they go home. So I think what in reality happened was they came over, said, you're coming home with us. You know what I'm saying? And they left, and her life is exactly the same as it always was. And what didn't happen and what was in her mind was them all cheersing to moms and families. You know what I mean?
Huh.
So I think like she was at the Wakefields, the Karen and the dad did come and get her. There was an interaction. It wasn't that. What the fantasy was that big fancy speech apology that we're laughing at. Are you open to this?
I'm opening.
I would cry with joy and gratitude if you would be open.
I'm opening. I don't want you to think I'm open. I'm opening.
Like so much of an anus.
So much of an anus. I do think that you have done an excellent job of excavating the history of Emily's fantastical coping mechanisms.
Thank you. I did used to be an archaeology teacher.
Yeah. And I believe the feedback was universally positive.
It said, don't ever change.
Don't learn a single thing about archaeology. Don't you dare. Don't you dare.
It said, you know too much.
My only concern is that she knows far too much about archaeology and not enough about whether Walt Disney was a Nazi.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You were saying how a brilliant excavator am I?
I think you did a good job excavating that. One of the things that's hard for me is I am loath to just be like, well, maybe it was all just like, maybe the book is, it doesn't
Oh,
feel...
it was all just a dream. Alice in Wonderland and Jacob's Ladder. Okay, you know what, Robert? I am also loath to that. And you have to give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm smart like you and that I'm not trying to wake up every day of my life and be like, it was all just a dream. And wouldn't that be cool? And wouldn't that be interesting and different? I understand this. I understand that this can be an extremely lazy framing and an extremely lazy way to try to like make things interesting. And that is why I said to myself, well, is it in the text? And I didn't actually really do a full thing, and I could follow up and do that if we think it's worth it. But in my sort of scanning of my mental Rolodex, I, tick, 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 and I said that's enough evidence for me to sort of present this just for discussion. I'm not saying it's a peer-reviewed journal here, okay? But for our casual podcast, I thought it was enough.
I mean, am I cranky right now? Sure. Should I have had a snack?
You haven't had your yogurt? You haven't had your noodles? What's the problem?
I haven't had my yogurt. I haven't had my noodles. I'm just like a crabby little... I mean, I'm loath to say it, but I'm a crabby little bitch boy right now. And if I look into the mirror of my Zoom call, I realize that you could have said anything and I would have had a negative reaction.
Wow.
I do think you said something that was just okay, but I gave you way more grief than you deserved.
You're so rude. Well, you know what? To punish you because you are a little bitch boy. I'm
crabby little bitch boy.
You're crabby little bitch boy. I am not going to tell you my other smart reading that I had. So
Wait, what
Guess
is it?
you'll never know. It's well, one of the other things, but guess you'll never know.
What
So
is it?
I know I'm not even pretending right now. This isn't me being like, oh, beg me, beg me. No, it's not happening because I'm gonna have to already put this on the end of this podcast. It's gonna be already 10 hours
No,
long.
you're not.
So,
You can't put this. It's so long.
so what's this? A separate thing? A follow-up? Oh, it's going in because the readers will know. They will say, Rebecca, she did her diligence. Robert has nice painted fingernails, but sometimes that's not enough. When in a court of law, no, you can show up with nice fingernails and a fancy hairdo. You can change your hair part. I think it's going to distract the jurors.
This is
I
like-
believe
okay.
that a jury of our peers is going to find me winning of my case.
So just to give you, I mean, we just talked for 25 minutes.
Yeah, and it's like the height of irony, something I know what it is, and always not necessarily you're knowing what it is, but it's truly the height of irony that you'll be like, oh my God, it's so long, it's so long, it's so long. But like it could have been so much faster and continues to be, could be being faster by you just being nicer.
I'm Robert. I am in apology. I'm on my apology tour for being a crabby little bitch boy. And I'd like to just very quickly summarize the fact that Rebecca has offered us a reading in which we see that the final reconciliation between Karen, Ronald, and Emily does not actually happen in the reality of the text, but rather in Emily's fantasy. As we've seen previously in the text, Emily has a rich history of creating a robust fantasy world when she cannot cope with the reality around her, especially vis-a-vis
Good.
family relationships.
Good. You're doing pretty good. You're doing good.
So we can see that at the end of the text, when Karen and Ronald have an almost unbelievable, actually an unbelievable about face in terms of their behavior towards Emily, in terms of their apology, in terms of their kindness, in terms of their accepting responsibility. We said this is unbelievable. This is not only unbelievable, we are not to believe it, for it is not in reality, it is only in Emily's fantasy world.
But what supports this, Robert? Just the fact she's had a fantasy once or twice? Who hasn't?
That's
when you went to the hair part. I knew it. I knew
Wait,
it.
no, I think I did such a good job making your argument for you.
That's wow. Well, listeners,
What? Did I not do a good job?
you did a great job. But as one of my professors once said to me when I showed them an application that I wrote for grad school by essay, they said, "This is nice, but where's the content?" And it was Paul Morrison.
And he was right.
100%.
And I think you're right too. Where is the content? What am I missing?
I can't. We're just gonna have to leave it to Beaver, as it were. So what this is, but I'm not publishing it. I'm putting this out there.
This was, you had kind of a point and I was a bitch about it. And had I just been quiet, you would have made your point. We would have moved on with our lives.
Fine. Anything else to tell me? What? We're here.
Oh, it's been such a long day.
Wait, you want to stop recording, actually, Kiki?
I want to stop recording and go to bed.
Fine. Thanks for listening to Sweet Valley Hive, hosted by Robert Marks and Rebecca Pardo. For more, check out our Instagram at Sweet Valley Hive. Theme song by Yessie and artwork by Elliot Carroll.